You do not lose your self-worth in one dramatic moment. You lose it in negotiations. In the tiny ones first. The conversation you let slide because you didn't want to seem difficult. The behavior you excused because they were going through a lot. The inconsistency you minimized because the good moments were so good. The standard you quietly lowered because asking for more suddenly felt risky. That is how self-worth erosion happens in relationships. Not all at once, not loudly, but through repetition. And the scariest part is that it often feels like love while it is happening. You think you're being patient. You think you're being mature. You think you're making room for complexity, imperfection, trauma, fear, and healing. And sometimes you are. But there is a line between healthy compassion and self-abandonment. A lot of people don't notice they crossed it until their entire emotional life starts revolving around someone else's instability. Maybe you felt this. You used to be clear about what you wanted. Communication, consistency, reciprocity, emotional presence, honesty, effort. But then you meet someone who gives you just enough depth to keep you invested, and just enough distance to keep you insecure. So instead of leaving, you adapt. At first, the adaptation looks small. You stop bringing up certain needs because they seem overwhelmed. You become more careful with your tone so they don't pull away. You give them more space than you want to give. You accept less than you wanted to accept. You tell yourself it's temporary. But over time, your baseline changes. Now you're proud of scraps you once would have rejected. Now you feel lucky for effort that should be normal. Now your standards feel high only because your environment trained you to live beneath them. This is where emotional conditioning quietly rewrites self-worth. When affection, attention, or reassurance become inconsistent, your brain starts assigning exaggerated value to whatever little does arrive. A kind message feels huge. A vulnerable conversation feels transformational. One good day feels like proof the relationship is improving. But if the overall pattern still leaves you anxious, underfed, or emotionally off balance, then those moments are not necessarily signs of growth. They may simply be rewards inside a cycle that keeps you attached. This is why bare minimum effort can start feeling deeply romantic, not because it is actually impressive, but because your emotional environment has become so deprived that relief now feels like abundance. That distortion is dangerous. It teaches you to clap for what should be standard. It teaches you to bond with instability. It teaches you to second-guess your own needs. And eventually, it teaches you that being loved poorly is better than risking being alone. That belief will keep you in almost relationships for years. And it often pairs with cognitive dissonance, because part of you knows something is wrong. You feel the anxiety, the confusion, the imbalance, the loneliness inside the connection. But another part of you keeps defending it. They do care. They're trying. They're just scared. They've been hurt. They're not expressive, but I know how they feel. So instead of responding to the repeated reality, you keep protecting the story that makes the pain feel meaningful. That is how a person starts becoming less recognizable to themselves. You become more tolerant of neglect, more grateful for inconsistency, more willing to overfunction emotionally, more likely to accept apologies without structural change, more likely to call your disappointment neediness, more likely to interpret your pain as a flaw in your expectations instead of a signal from your standards. And when that happens long enough, self-trust begins to weaken. You stop asking, "Is this good for me?" and start asking, "How can I keep this from falling apart?" That question changes your entire posture. Instead of evaluating the relationship, you begin managing it. Instead of listening to your intuition, you begin overriding it. Instead of honoring your needs, you begin editing them. That is not partnership. That is psychological shrinkage. And yes, attachment style can intensify this. If you lean anxious, you may respond to inconsistency by increasing effort. You become more attentive, more available, more forgiving, more focused on repair. But in one-sided relationships, that extra effort does not create safety. It usually just creates deeper imbalance. You become the emotional stabilizer, while the other person remains free to stay undefined, inconsistent, or half-invested. If the other person leans avoidant or emotionally unavailable, the cycle can become even more painful. They give you closeness, then retreat. You feel destabilized, then work harder to reconnect. They return when the tension is high enough to re-engage the bond, then distance again when consistency is required. Over time, The pattern trains you to work for things that should never have required work at that level in the first place. And this is where self-worth erosion becomes identity erosion. Because you are not just accepting less, you are becoming someone who expects less. Maybe you used to walk away from poor communication quickly. Now you wait. Maybe you used to see hot and cold behavior as a red flag. Now you call it complexity. Maybe you used to trust your discomfort. Now you rationalize it. Maybe you used to believe that love should feel safe. Now you think anxiety is part of passion. That shift is expensive. And the cost is not just the relationship. The cost is your relationship with yourself. You start abandoning your own signals. You start silencing your own wisdom. You start mistrusting your own pain. You start believing that asking for consistency is pressure, asking for clarity is neediness, and asking for reciprocity is too much. None of that is true. Healthy love does not require you to disappear in order to keep it. It does not reward you for tolerating confusion. It does not call your standards unrealistic just because someone else cannot meet them. And it does not force you to become emotionally smaller so the connection can survive. Real love expands self-respect. It does not eat it. This is the part many people need to hear clearly. You can deeply care about someone and still become less healthy around them. That does not make the bond fake. It makes the pattern costly. You can have chemistry and still be shrinking. You can have affection and still be under love. You can have history and still be abandoning yourself. You can understand their wounds and still be absorbing consequences that were never yours to carry. The power shift starts when you notice the negotiations. Not the dramatic betrayals, the daily ones. The moment you wanted to ask for more but swallowed it. The moment you accepted confusion as normal. The moment you praised effort that didn't actually meet the standard. The moment you defended a pattern that kept draining you. The moment you felt lonely with them and called it patience. Those moments matter because self-worth is not only expressed in what you demand, it is expressed in what you stop normalizing. And once you stop normalizing emotional malnutrition, your entire perception changes. You stop being impressed by crumbs. You stop calling inconsistency potential. You stop giving gold-level loyalty to half-built dynamics. You stop mistaking your tolerance for strength. You stop romanticizing how much you can endure. Because endurance is not the goal, discernment is. So if you've been wondering why you barely recognize yourself after a relationship, a talking stage, a situationship, or a long season of emotional uncertainty, maybe the answer is not that you loved too hard. Maybe the answer is that you negotiated against your own standards for too long. And healing begins the moment you stop doing that. You rebuild self-worth by honoring your discomfort faster, by believing patterns sooner, by refusing to overvalue rare effort, by letting consistency become your baseline again, by remembering that your needs are not excessive just because the wrong person struggled to meet them. You get yourself back in pieces first, then all at once. And one day, the things you once begged to receive will look exactly the way they always were. Basic.